All right, guys, we've been talking about respiration, and we've been talking about how you have to have ATP. But on this next test, there's going to be some specific questions about ATP, what it looks like and how it works. So, anybody remember what kind of chemical ATP is? We talked about 4 kinds of biological molecules. We talked about proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and what was the other one?
ATP.
Yeah, but that's the category ATP falls in. It is a same category as DNA and RNA. Say nucleic acid. Now, like all nucleic acids, ATP is made out of 3 main parts. In the middle is this thing that usually looks like a pentagon. And anytime you see rings in biology, usually the rings are sugars. In particular, this is the sugar ribose. The same sugar that's found where? RNA. It's the same sugar that's in RNA. Attached up to that ribose, and like I said, anywhere there's a bend in this structure, there's implied to be a carbon there. Except for this top one up here where there's an oxygen. All right, attached up to this first carbon in all nucleotides is a big ring-like structure. Usually it's got some nitrogen in it. It's one of those nitrogenous bases. Like in DNA, there's thymine and what are some other nitrogenous bases? Adenine, cytosine, and guanine. But in ATP, there's only one. It's ATP for a reason. The nitrogenous base is adenine. A. What's the T stand for in ATP? Tri, right? Adenosine triphosphate. Attached over here is another little carbon, and attached up to that carbon are 3 phosphate groups.
Whoa.
And those are three groups of, it's a phosphorus atom attached up to some oxygens, essentially is what a phosphate group is. This is ATP. Sugar in the middle, ribose. Nitrogenous base over here, adenine. And then attached to the other side are 3 phosphate groups. So that's ATP. That's ATP in its charged up form. It's ready to go. Now we've seen that before. But when ATP gets used, it has to get broken, right? What's the word for reactions that break things down? It's another thing we talked about earlier in this class. Reactions that break apart little pieces, or big pieces to make smaller pieces.
Called, I know the word.
Close. Hydrolysis. That means to split. Lysis means to split. So ATP has to get hydrolyzed to get the energy out. So let's say you're about to go for a walk. Your muscle cells need energy. Your body has to start breaking down ATP. Well, it turns out when it breaks it down, what's the only thing that gets broken off? Just one of these phosphate groups. Just this last one. This gets broken off. And usually what happens is that little phosphate then goes and attaches up to something else, like a part of your muscle. And what does that phosphate bring with it? It brings energy. It's a way to transfer energy. It's a way to activate things, to turn them on, to give them the energy that they need to do something. So this is not ATP anymore. What is this now?
ADP.
Now it's called ADP. Because now it only has what?
2.
Now it only has 2 phosphates. And now it's kind of like what? In this form, it's like what human kind of a machine? It's like a battery, but a battery that's what? Not charged, but can be recharged, right? It's like a rechargeable battery that's dead. And what's the process in your body that recharges your batteries? Cell respiration. Cell respiration is going to take energy from where? from your food, and it's going to use it to put that phosphate back right there and recharge it back. That's what cell respiration does. So we might put that in an equation. Might look like this. ATP, if we're going left to right, can be broken apart into ADP and P. That phosphate group can be given to something else to give it energy, to transfer energy to it. Or we could go right to left, and that's showing you how ATP is actually made, how it's put back together. Question?
When you're running a mile, trying to gain cardio or whatnot, do you gain more of that ADP or that, or is it?
When you get in better shape, one of the main things that happens is that you become better at transporting oxygen to your muscles. Your heart gets stronger. Your lungs work better. You actually grow more blood vessels. And your muscles get more oxygen, which means they can do more what? Cellular respiration, which means they have more ATP. That's essentially what happens when you get in better shape. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the narrow way of looking at it. All right, so know what ATP looks like. Sugar in the middle, nitrogen base connected to one side, adenine, 3 phosphates connected to the other. Know that when you need to get energy out of it, it gets hydrolyzed, it gets broken down. And essentially all that gets broken off is that last little phosphate. It gets transferred to something else, gives energy to that something else. And that equation is important too. All right, that being said, let's go back and talk about the rest of respiration here for a second. We already talked about glycolysis. Step number 1, breaks apart sugar. Step 2 is Krebs cycle. And it happens inside the mitochondria. What's that innermost part of the mitochondria called? The matrix. That's where it happens. Step 3 is the electron transport, and it happens on those little folded parts of the inner membrane, and those are called the cristae. Essentially, Krebs cycle's job is to oxidize what was left of the sugar. That's called pyruvic acid. What did we say oxidize means? Take out electrons, maybe more importantly, take out what? Energy. Taking out electrons, taking out energy. And most of that energy and most of those electrons are transferred to little molecules called either NAD plus or NAD or FAD rather. Those molecules are called electron carriers. And they're essentially a way to store energy temporarily. And eventually your body's going to use that temporarily stored energy to make what? What are we trying to make ultimately here? ATP. So during Krebs cycle, the sugar gets oxidized. You make 4 main things. A little bit of ATP, 2. What's left of the sugar comes out of your body as CO2. You breathe it out. And then you've got these electron carriers, charged up electron carriers, that in the last step, they're going to be used to make lots of ATP, tons of it. So after the first 2 steps, glycolysis and Krebs cycle, how many ATPs are we to the good so far? 4. 2 from step 1, 2 from step 2. 4 ATPs is not enough to do hardly anything. It's not much energy. Most of the energy that started out in the sugar is now in these things, these electron carriers. And it's the job of step 3 to get the energy out of those and use it to make lots of ATP. So let's go to a picture here. Step 3 is electron transport. And what we're looking at here is a picture of the mitochondria. This is the inner membrane. And remember that Krebs cycle happened in here. This is the matrix. What happens during electron transport is those NADH molecules that were made during glycolysis in the Krebs cycle, they get oxidized, which again means what gets taken away from them? Electrons, but more importantly, energy. And those electrons are taken away by these proteins that are embedded in the inner mitochondrial membrane. They're called cytochromes. And the electrons will move across those electron carriers, almost like the electrons might move through wire. But as they move, the energy from those moving electrons is used to pump around what? What gets pumped around? Hydrogen ions. And in this case, those hydrogen ions get pumped into this space out here between the inner and the outer membranes. And you start to build up a big gradient of hydrogens. Those hydrogens want to go which way? If you're pumping them out, they want to do what? They want to go back in. But they can't, because as you can see in this picture, what's this membrane made out of? Phospholipid bilayer, and they don't like ions, right? But there is a way in. And the way in is that guy. That's ATP synthase. It's a channel. And the hydrogens will shoot through that thing really fast because there's a really big what? Big gradient, a big difference in concentration. They run through. This enzyme is able to use the energy of those moving H pluses to put ADP and P together to make ATP, charging up your batteries. What do we call this way of making ATP? Using H plus energy from H plus ions. It's called chemiosmosis. And in this step, just this step of respiration, your body makes about 34 ATPs for every 1 glucose. Remember that in the first 2 steps you only made 4. This step makes 34 more. This is where the energy comes from. And then the one other thing we need to mention, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, this is aerobic respiration, which means it requires what?
Oxygen.
Oxygen. But you really don't require the oxygen until this very last step. What did we say oxygen does? What's the role of oxygen? Why do you need to breathe?
Electrons. Find electrons.
Yeah. Oxygen will take those electrons away from that last protein. Because if it didn't, those electrons would build up. And what would happen to this protein? It'd become really negative. And what would happen when another electron tried to come there? It'd repel it and push it away, and the whole thing would shut down, and you'd die. You'd run out of ATP. Oxygen comes in and takes away those electrons. It's the final electron acceptor. And when it takes away those electrons, it also hooks up with what else? If you hook up with the negative, you probably also need to hook up with what? Positive. What are the positive things? Hydrogen ions. If you put some oxygen and some hydrogens and some electrons together, what do you end up with? What would hydrogen, oxygen, and some electrons give you? Water. And this is why one of the products of respiration is water vapor or water.
Like breath? Breathing out?
It stays in your body. Some of it you breathe out, some of it you keep in. So electron transport happens on the cristae, the inner mitochondrial membrane. It makes lots of ATP, 34, using energy from H pluses. We call that chemiosmosis. Oxygen's role is to come in and be the final acceptor of electrons. And it combines with those electrons and eventually makes them water. All right, the one other thing that we need to mention here is the anaerobic version of respiration. Do you do anaerobic respiration?
Yes. You do, but not as much as they do.
You do it when you're running low on what?
Oxygen.
When you're running low on oxygen. Because it's really inefficient.
Yeah.
Aerobic respiration makes about 38 ATPs per glucose. How many are made during anaerobic respiration?
4, 6.
2. Only 2. So aerobic respiration is like 19 times more efficient. When you can do aerobic respiration, you're going to do aerobic respiration. About the only time you're going to do this is when you're exercising like full speed, sprinting, swimming as hard as you can go, lifting the heaviest weights you can lift. Something that's straining your body, using up a whole lot of ATP and a whole lot of oxygen. But there are some things that only do this. Some really small things, like some bacteria, some yeast. Why can they get by with doing only this?
Because they're so small. They don't need much.
They don't need a lot of energy because they're not very wet. They're not very active. They don't do much. That bacteria just sort of sit there. Yeast don't do much. Okay? Things that are active, things that are large, have to do aerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration, though, happens in 2 steps. Glycolysis. Same glycolysis we just got through talking about. It takes sugar, it splits it, makes 3 main things. NADH, electron carriers, stored energy, ATP, and pyruvate. And then step 2 is fermentation. We said before that during glycolysis, your body takes this NAD plus stuff, this electron carrier, gives it electrons, and makes NADH out of it. The problem is you have a limited amount of that. And if you didn't have a way to turn it back, you would run out. In electron transport, in aerobic respiration, NADH is turned back into NAD plus, so you never run out. But in anaerobic respiration, you don't do that step. So there has to be a way to convert NADH back to NAD plus, and that's the job of fermentation. Fermentation takes the NADH that you made in glycolysis and the pyruvic acid that you made in glycolysis, reacts those together, makes NAD plus. But if you're a yeast, what else do you make when you're doing this?
Ethanol.
You make ethanol,
Yeah, that's
which is drinking alcohol. And you also make what gas?
Carbon dioxide.
CO2. This is important. This is not only how like alcoholic beverages are made, it's how bread's made, right? You put yeast in the bread, the yeast are alive. The yeast start eating the bread dough. They start doing respiration on it. Eventually they start fermenting it. They make ethanol, which gives a lot of the taste to the bread and the flavor and the smell. They make CO2, which makes the bread what? Rise. It blows it up like a balloon. Yeah.
Oh, and like some airsoft guns, they use CO2. Like, why would they use CO2? Because
it's
more powerful.
It's just
But why would they not use something else?
it's just cheap and not very reactive.
Because I know if you open this thing, it's like white, like smoke comes out.
Well, that's because when you pressurize it,
cold.
it starts almost turning into a liquid. It's really cold. Yeah.
I was alcohol, man. I always like thought they just like did them like squeeze stuff out.
No, they take sugar, they put it in a big vat. It could be sugar from, it could be corn, it could be from grapes, it could be from essentially anything. Add in some kind of yeast, and essentially the yeast start feeding on it. And one of their waste products is alcohol.
So why don't people just make it at home?
Some people do. Yes.
Moonshine.
That's a moonshine.
Put yeast in water, it turns off on it.
This is CO2. All right. Now we do fermentation, but we don't do this kind of fermentation. Right? This is called alcoholic fermentation. When you do anaerobic respiration, you don't make the CO2, you don't make the ethanol, but instead you make what other material? What do you make during fermentation?
CO2.
You make lactic acid, which typically you're only going to make much of when you become really what?
Sore.
Yeah, but when you're really working out hard, right? That's when you're doing a lot of fermentation, and this is what makes you sore. At least one of the factors that make you sore, because this builds up mostly where?
In your muscles.
In your muscles, because they're using most of the energy. They're using most of the ATP, and it makes you sore when it builds up. Eventually, once you've rested, you're not exercising anymore, your body's going to break that down and get even more energy out of it, but it takes a while. Yeah.
Like if you had a big bowl of yeast and you put like a big glass container around it, and then at the bottom you had like a little lighter lid. Could once the ethanol like can fill up it and light it, and